On the morning of 6th of November 1895, in the small sitting room off Alva Vanderbilt's new townhouse at 72nd Street and Madison Avenue in New York, a young bride smooths the fingers of her pale kid gloves one last time. Outside, the New York Times is already calling St. Thomas's Church a floral fairyland. Vogue has devoted almost an entire issue to her trousseau. Inside this quiet room, Consuelo Vanderbilt, aged 18, sits very straight. Years earlier, her mother forced her into a steel posture brace. Now the habit of stillness is second nature. On her lap rests a linen handkerchief, monogrammed CV, one of hundreds of embroidered pieces packed for a life in England. She has written no letters this morning. In her memoir, she would later recall, "I spent the morning of my wedding day in tears and alone." The gloves, so essential to a duchess's public costume, also hide the tremor in her hands. Downstairs, the guests are assembling. Upstairs, amid satin, lace, and a trousseau worth more than many lives, a bride sits very still and counts. Not garments, but the private cost of a public role. On a chilly afternoon in late November 1887, in the Petit Chateau at 665th Avenue, 10-year-old Consuelo Vanderbilt waits in the long drawing room while her mother, Alva, adjusts the buttons of her child-sized gloves. The mansion, completed only a few years earlier for Alva and William K. Vanderbilt, was a showpiece of French chateau architecture set amid the new Gold Coast of Fifth Avenue. Light filters through tall windows onto velvet chairs and gilt mirrors. Across the marble floor, a French governess waits with copybooks. Later, in The Glitter and the Gold, Consuelo would describe how her mother ordered a steel rod strapped down her spine, over her shoulders and around her waist, to improve her posture. Etiquette manuals insisted that a young lady's bearing announced her breeding before she spoke. Alva turned posture into a daily discipline. Lessons come before play, and even play is rehearsed for onlooking society. Calling cards left with older ladies, the correct curtsy, the gloved hand offered just so. The steel rod presses against her ribs as she practices walking across the drawing room, her footsteps silent on thick carpets. Outside, the city hums with commerce built on railroads. Inside, a child learns that her body is public property. From the start, refinement is less a gift than a regime. Each stitch and strap teaching a girl that grace is something constructed, not born. The steel rod will disappear before the wedding day. Its lesson will not. By August 1893, at Marble House in Newport, Rhode Island, Consuelo was 16. The house, completed in 1892 by architect Richard Morris Hunt for Alva, was built almost entirely of marble and quickly became one of the most talked about cottages on Bellevue Avenue. On summer mornings, the sound of the Atlantic drifts through tall windows as footmen carry in crates from Paris hats, fans, gloves, and sample gowns. Newport society columns note Alva's theme balls and her daughter's graceful presence, but they do not record Consuelo's later recollection that she felt like a prisoner within her mother's ambitious plans. After breakfast, she practices playing the piano in a silk dress too warm for the weather. The ivory keys feel cool beneath her gloved fingers. In the afternoons, she rides, always veiled and gloved, past the iron gates of other estates. Calling cards are arranged like chess pieces on a silver tray in the front hall. Visits are scheduled, not chosen. The sea lies just beyond the balustrade, its salt air carrying the cries of gulls, but every outing is chaperoned, every gesture read. Newport sells itself as leisure, yet for a girl whose future has been pre-spent, each golden afternoon is another rehearsal. Next year, Alva will begin to plan not only parties, but an export of daughter, dowry, and trousseau. In May 1894, in a fitting room at the House of Worth in Paris, Alva and Consuelo stood before triple mirrors. Charles Frederick Worth's couture house had become the favored dressmaker of royalty and American millionaires. Gowns bearing his label signaled both money and modernity. Here, the trousseau ceases to be an abstraction. Bolts of ivory satin, Chantilly lace, fine lawn chemises, and embroidered petticoats are laid out like offerings on mahogany tables. Dressmakers pin hems while Alva discusses sleeves and trains in rapid French. The air smells of lavender sachets and fabric sizing. For American dollar princesses, wardrobes were investments as much as garments, meant to carry a bride from Fifth Avenue to English country houses without a misstep. Consuelo adjusts her gloves as corsetiers measure her waist, the tape pulled tight. The order book notes yards of lace and dozens of bodices. No one records the quiet dread of a girl whose life is being translated into fabric. Between the 1870s and 1914, hundreds of American heiresses married into the European aristocracy. One 1915 edition of Titled Americans counted more than 450 such unions. The trousseau becomes an architecture of expectation, an entire future folded into linen and silk. Soon, fashion journals will itemize that future dress by dress. They will not ask if she chose it. On a gray February morning in 1890, in an upstairs schoolroom at 660 Fifth Avenue, Consuelo is drilled in French verbs while wearing gloves that slightly restrict her fingers. Private tutors and governesses, standard for upper-class girls of the period, teach languages, history, music, and drawing, but deportment quietly underpins all. Her mother inspects her handwriting, insisting that letters to older relatives and potential patrons be faultless. The day's exercise. Thank you notes for gifts received after a small dinner. Gratitude, Alva reminds her, is written on paper, not merely felt. The pen scratches across cream stationery. In her memoir, Consuelo remembered her mother's famous declaration, "I do the thinking, you do as you are told." It is a lesson in obedience disguised as education. Refinement is presented as culture, but it also trains a girl to read herself as an instrument to be tuned. When she finally asserts, "I considered I had a right to choose my own husband," the rebellion will be written in the same careful script. By January 1894, the New York winter season was in full swing. In ballrooms along Fifth Avenue and in hotels like the Waldorf, society reporters note the presence of Miss Consuelo Vanderbilt, praising her height and distinguished carriage. At home, Alva stages rehearsals. Consuelo practices entering a drawing room, gloves in place, fan folded just so in one hand. She learns when to remove her gloves, never during formal calls, always before eating, and how to leave them on when dancing to protect both hand and reputation, as etiquette writers advised. Photographers capture her in high-necked gowns and long gloves, images later reproduced in illustrated papers. The captions praise a perfect product of modern American upbringing, but they do not mention the steel rod, the tears, or the terror of failing to meet the standard she has been fashioned to represent. To come out is not to emerge as oneself, but as a character perfected by others. As introductions multiply, so do offers, some for dances, others for marriage. In April 1895, in a large bedroom at Alva's townhouse in New York, the first serious trousseau lists were spread across a mahogany table. Dressmakers, milliners, and linen merchants send invoices. Alva, recently divorced and determined to secure her position through her daughter's match, checks each line. Some modern reconstructions, drawing on Vogue's coverage and surviving garments, estimate that Consuelo's trousseau included dozens of gowns, at least 75 by one count, and scores of shoes and gloves, along with undergarments, nightgowns, and monogrammed handkerchiefs. The exact numbers matter less than the logic. A bride's body must never appear unprepared, from breakfast wrapper to coronation robes. Consuelo helps fold fine lawn chemises, running gloved fingers along embroidered initials. Each object bears her name, yet every decision has been taken by others. The trousseau promises abundance, but its true function is continuity, ensuring that no moment of the bride's new life falls outside prescribed elegance. While seamstresses sew, negotiations proceed elsewhere, over assets measured not in silk, but in shares. In September 1894, at Marble House, Alva informed Consuelo that Charles Spencer Churchill, 9th Duke of Marlborough, would visit. The Duke, newly responsible for Blenheim Palace and its debts, needs an heiress. Alva, newly divorced, wants a title in the family. Consuelo's heart, however, is already inclined toward Winthrop Rutherford, an American gentleman she later described with clear affection. In her memoir, she recalled telling her, "Mother, I considered I had a right to choose my own husband. These words, the bravest I have ever uttered, brought down a frightful storm of protest." Letters between Alva and friends, cited by later biographers, show a cool calculation. European title in exchange for Vanderbilt capital. The trousseau being assembled is part of that bargain, the visible proof of what the bride brings. Consuelo sits in the Marble House drawing room, gloves folded in her lap, as introductions are made. In that moment, her education, beauty, and wardrobe merge into a single negotiable asset. Within a year, the press will call it the wedding of the century. Privately, she will call it something closer to captivity. On 14 November 1895, Vogue published an extended feature titled Miss Consuelo Vanderbilt's Trousseau. The issue, and others that month, devote extraordinary space to her wardrobe, noting that no trousseau ever made in America has excited such interest in the world of fashion. The article describes her ivory lace bridal gown, a creation of worth costing thousands of dollars. Over $180,000 in today's money, according to later dress historians, detailing its chiffon bodice, leg of mutton sleeves, and cascades of lace. Accessories are listed as carefully as the dress itself: veils, shoes, and inevitably gloves. This public inventory of private garments turns the trousseau into news. Even her underlinen became a subject of speculation. Later commentators would note that the exposure of her intimate wardrobe echoed the intrusive gaze on her marriage itself. When a young woman's nightgowns are national news, it is clear her life no longer belongs to her alone. Next, the same papers will report not garments, but terms, the price at which Blenheim is saved and a bride's future sold. By October 1895, legal drafts circulated between New York and Woodstock, Oxfordshire. The marriage settlement grants the Duke a $2.5 million trust in railroad stock with a guaranteed minimum annual income of $100,000. Consuelo receives her own allowance, also backed by millions held in trust. Newspapers present such marriages as financial transactions, American millions flowing abroad to support decaying estates. For Blenheim, those millions will fund crucial repairs and modernization. At Alva's desk, the same hand that selected the laces now signs legal documents. Consuelo, not yet 19, is the central figure in these papers, but not their author. Her gloves, so carefully chosen, conceal ink stains as she adds her name where required. The trousseau is the visible part of a larger ledger in which affection barely appears. On the wedding morning, fabric and finance will meet in a single crowded church. On the 6th November 1895, crowds gathered outside St. Thomas's Church on Fifth Avenue. The New York Times describes the interior as a fairyland of palms, roses, and violets. The galleries are draped in maple leaves and cosmos. Inside, Charles Spencer Churchill, 9th Duke of Marlborough, waits at the altar. Consuelo, delayed upstairs by tears that swell her eyes, arrives 20 minutes late. The Life magazine cartoon published afterward shows her in chains, her mother holding the shackles, an exaggeration that nonetheless captures public unease. In her memoir, she wrote, "I spent the morning of my wedding day in tears and alone. A footman had been posted at the door of my apartment, and not even my governess was admitted. Her Worth gown moves like a cloud of lace. Her gloves, perfect and pale, hide the marks of fingernails pressed into her palms. The trousseau has done its work. Every eye sees a flawless duchess. Almost none sees the girl who tried to refuse this dress, this title, this day. The wardrobe will cross the Atlantic with her. Whether the self inside it can survive is another matter." In February 1896 at Blenheim Palace in Oxfordshire, Consuelo walked through the long library, its chill softened only partly by new heating funded from her dowry. Portraits of earlier dukes and duchesses line the walls. She has been imported to secure their legacy. Her trousseau proves immediately functional. Court dress for presentation to Queen Victoria, country tweeds for estate visits, elaborate evening gowns for political dinners, all are drawn from the overflowing wardrobe shipped from New York. Yet letters and later recollections suggest that the clothing felt like armor as much as adornment. Consuelo became known for visiting tenants and supporting local causes, bringing blankets and food rather than gowns. Still, expectations required that she host and appear, perfectly dressed, at Blenheim's state occasions. On certain evenings, she stands at the top of the great staircase, adjusting her gloves before descending to dinner she dreads. The trousseau has succeeded in its purpose. It has made her visually belong to Blenheim. Belonging, however, is not the same as being at home. Change will not begin with a new dress, but with a decision to step out of the role those dresses were made to serve. By 1906, Consuelo and the Duke had formally separated. She spends increasing time away from Blenheim, moving toward a life shaped less by title and more by work. Her energies turn to social reform, child welfare, women's higher education, and municipal politics. In 1913, she became chairwoman of the Women's Municipal Party and later served on the London County Council for Southwark, using her position to support free school meals and medical inspections for children. Wardrobes shift accordingly. Reports from London charities describe bazaars where duchesses sell donated garments for relief funds. Consuelo's public reputation becomes tied less to her gowns and more to her committees and speeches. In private, she still writes letters on monogram paper. Her handwriting steady, gloves now worn more for practicality than performance. The same discipline once used to endure fittings and force social rounds now serves campaigns and committees. Refinement, repurposed, becomes a tool rather than a cage. In 1953, working on her memoir The Glitter and the Gold, Consuelo Vanderbilt Balsan finally lists the emotional contents of her marriage with the same precision once applied to her trousseau. By 1963, Vogue photographed her in a gold dress in Southampton, an elderly woman seated among crystal chandeliers and framed photographs. Somewhere, preserved in a museum collection, her Worth wedding gown survives as an artifact, catalogued and stored, no longer an obligation to be worn. In her later years, Consuelo used her position and resources to support social causes rather than social climbing, and chose a second marriage, to Jacques Balsan, for companionship rather than strategy. The girl whose trousseau was once priced in thousands ends her life measured instead by committees chaired, causes supported, and grandchildren visited. The architecture of privilege remained, but she had learned to walk through it differently. In the Museum of the City of New York, the bridal gown once described stitch by stitch in Vogue now hangs unworn, its gloves and laces flattened behind glass. The fabric endures. The life inside it quietly outgrew its design.